So, Carl Rogers once said, "What is most personal is most general." And C. Wright Mills once said, "It is the job of good sociology to reveal the public issues inherent in troubles personally felt." So for me, this paper, titled "Where Are You From?" came out of a personal experience that I've had since moving to Canada in 1999, and subsequently studying and working and living between Canada and the US since then. And that is the experience of being asked fairly frequently by relative strangers that I have no relationship or connection to the question, "Where are you from?" These days, my technical and provocative answer is Canada, where I am now a naturalized citizen and where I have lived longer than the other place that I call home, which is Sierra Leone in West Africa. So when my answer of Canada is not satisfying, I have been asked, "Where were you born?" The answer to that is Germany. That is an equally unsatisfying answer. So then, my experience has been that when people do not get the answer that they were looking for, that they truly wanted to ask about in the first place, I get questions like, "Where are you really from?" You see, my thought when this deepening interrogation occurs is that the answer is really being sought to questions like, what is your lineage and ancestry? Where did you immigrate from? Where did the first generation immigrants in your family come from? What is your ethnicity? And I was actually asked this yesterday, again, relative strange. I know we're at a conference and we're all asking each other, "Where are you from?" But I experienced what I'll talk about in a moment as identity interrogation, where someone asked me, "Where are you from?" I said, "Canada." And then they asked, "Where did you grow up?" And I said, "Oh, did you grow up in Vancouver?" And I said, "Well, I've been there since undergrad." I changed the topic. And then I said, subsequently the conversation went to something about Africa, and I said something about Sierra Leone. And then the question was, "Oh, is that where you immigrated from?" And I gave a non-committal answer. And then my next question was, "Is that where your parents immigrated from?" And I finally looked at this person and said, "You know, it's a really, really long story. I really don't want to go into it right now." I am from a family I have 7 other siblings, there's 8 of us, and we were born across 3 different continents because my parents were traveling for work. It is never a simple answer. And that is true for many, many people who have global African identities that I know today. So then, of course, there's also the deeper, still, and unspoken questions, like, who are you anyway? How did you come to be here in this place or position of privilege? And I won't say a lot about my work and who I am and all of that. I have actually got a question that's close to this variant. Why should I be talking or listening to you? How come your English is so good? How long have you been here in Canada, like here, again, your family, your ancestry, etc.? Why are you different than the stereotype that I know about of African peoples? And I said these were deeper, still unspoken questions, but you need to know that I have been asked variations of all of these, and some of them exactly as they are worded here. And so for me, over the years, as I continue to experience this interrogation, at some point, I begin to wonder if the implication is that I'm being asked whether I belong here, and whether the statement is, "You are not from here." And of course, the reality for America and Canada is that we are all from somewhere else if we are not Native Americans. We all immigrated from somewhere. And so I wonder why I'll be at a dinner table or in an elevator and I'll be the one asked the question, "Where are you from?" So I have been troubled by and have run the emotional gamut with this line of questioning. So much so, actually, that after I wrote this paper, I have now completed a book of short stories about global African identities, coming soon. It's not fully done through publishing yet. And I did that after writing this paper because I'm still cooking and working on it, and I want to start this conversation beyond academia. And the question is, why does it matter? And why be troubled enough to want to learn about this experience? Well, there are a couple of reasons. And one other very personal reason for me is these three beautiful children that are mine. And the reason is my eldest, Kayla, she's 9. She's already come home from school and said to me, "Mommy, what do I answer when people say to me, where are you from?" And here's the thing, I was born in Germany, like I said, grew up traveling, I was young when my family went back to West Africa, Sierra Leone. So I do say I grew up in Sierra Leone. And because I grew up in West Africa, this might not be true if I had grown up in Southern Africa or maybe even in the Sudan areas, but in West Africa, I did not get the question, where are you from? I did not grow up being asked that. And so I know that I have a kind of shield to some of the internalized oppression issues that I only learned about and got confronted to when I moved back to the West and specifically to North America. And so to have my 9-year-old already ask me that question had me go, okay, I need to think about this some more. I am raising children now in the West. The other reason is that, as my work and my practice in leadership and organizational and social transformation work has grown, I have realized that this is an issue I need to understand for myself, sort of like the Sasha women. In my work in organizational life and in education, I teach university as well as work in healthcare in Canada. We're always working on sort of large organization transformation, complex issues. And then there's the ambitious piece of work that I've taken on with 2 other Africans with global African identities, where we are looking at collecting and sharing stories of African leadership in a more sort of broader, fuller, more diverse way than the stories that we know are popularized out there. Small task, but we're working on it, we're collecting stories. And then the third thing is I believe that this is a phenomenon that is shared by peoples of color, especially in the West. And just this past weekend, Elizabeth, thank you, pointed out that the New York Times ran on the front cover this story, an open letter to the woman who told me my family should go back to China. Hashtag this is 2016. I wish I had time to show the video that went along with this story, but it's about 8 minutes, and in the service of telling you some stories of my own experience, I'm not going to show it, but I invite you to please look it up. If you just Google this, you will find it, and you will find the video, and it is raw and emotional and very difficult to watch, and definitely worth the watch. So my goal with the particular paper for this conference, engaging at the intersections of identity and identity difference, was really first to understand the experience and then to bring awareness to it. And so in doing that, the first thing I did was try to understand and unpack these experiences, because I went with using autoethnography, which is being when you are a member of an identity group, studying a phenomenon from the place of those experiences, and the analytic form goes beyond just the evocative experiences that you might use to understand it, and bringing some analysis to it, checking with others if this is shared experience, etc. And so in the paper, I won't go through it, but there are a couple of vignettes of sort of times I've been asked where you're from that stood out for me or that lended themselves to the analysis that I shared. And also, coming to the conference the first day, I posted on Facebook that I was doing this talk and asked people to leave comments. I'll try to go quickly through this, and I want to read you 2 of the comments that came through from sort of asking people to share their experiences as well. So what I did understand for myself in going through that process was that over the years, I have run the gamut from, first being amused, when I moved to Vancouver University, and the most common question then was, how come your English was so good? Because people expected me to be ASL or have less well-spoken English. I don't know why. I'm from British West Africa. I was a colonized person. I grew up speaking English. They're like, was it your first language? Actually, yes. So I was really amused. And then there was this underlying experience of surprise. And then I moved to irritation, because you get it so often, and an underlying experience of disorientation. And then I just moved to all-out anger, and then underlying experience of being stuck, where do I go? I'm often still stunned when I get a question and I don't know where to go with it. and how to answer it. And that for me is the experience of identity interrogation. And then I have moved, there's other experiences where I get identical questions, and yet I have a feeling of warmth and an underlying experience of being welcomed. I'm drawn into dialogue with the person asking me and an underlying experience of being engaged. And I leave with a feeling of happiness and joy and an underlying experience of not being stuck at all, unstuck and in flow. And I realize that's because in those cases there's some relational connection. And it's not, sort of that relative stranger encounter and that interrogation of where you're from. And so I want to say too that, the second thing that I was able to unpack doing this work was, as I've said, oh no, I missed something here. The other thing then about whether it was an identity interrogation or relational connection experience was that I realized, it's not about, when I have either experience, it's not about, at that point, it's not about who asks. Because between writing the paper and coming here, I sort of journaled every time I was asked the question. And I realized it was almost exclusively first or second generation immigrants that asked me. For example, my husband and I went out for drinks one day, and the bartender came by and said, "Oh, I'm wondering, where are you guys from?" And I think the look on our faces, he said, "Oh, actually, my family is from Zambia, and I thought I heard a little bit of an African accent, and that's why I'm asking." So it started sort of like that interrogation experience, and then he made the connection, and we got into quite a bit of a dialogue with it. Many different kinds of people ask these questions, but something about who and how it's asked, and because it's these chance encounters, sometimes it's just the micro, simple things. So, for example, here as well, we've all been asking each other, where are you from? There's only one person who's come up to me and said, "I'm from Italy. Where are you from?" Made all the difference in the world, I noticed. All the difference in the world. So I wanted to say that out front. And so relationship does matter. How you ask does matter. And when it is an identity interrogation experience, the potential for transformational learning is there when that emotional trigger happens, when it's an interrogation experience, and when in that case, the conceptions of social power are there. So when it's an interracial exchange, sometimes it is more of a trigger, so there's more of a dimension, because it starts begging the questions, who asks and who decides, right? And who gets chosen to be asked that question, and by whom begin to matter. And then so in these cases, then all of the conceptions around social power and status and socially constructed ideologies around race begin to come up for me in less of a theoretical way and in more of a felt way. And so one of the points I wanted to make about that is just in the current political climate, I think we're all very aware of the danger of thinking about people in boxes and putting them there and relating to them from that place. So I will say no more about that. However, in that trigger moment, the transformational possibility is there. And what I've begun to realize is that how we make that shift depends on the response of the receiver, and it matters. My ability to bypass that emotional trigger, I was not able to bypass it yesterday when I finally looked at this person and said, I really don't want to talk about that right now. But when I'm able to bypass it and ask a counter question or invite also, where are you from also, and invite a bit of a dialogue, there is possibility to challenge assumptions and to engage in transformational learning. Now this is touchy because I know that in African communities and in Black communities, I have heard the argument and worked with the dialogue of, well, I do not exist to educate the oppressor. Why is the onus on me? And so I just want to go back to one of the quotes I began with. It is the job of good sociology to reveal the public issues inherent in troubles personally felt. So it is difficult, but I believe there is a mutuality there, that we all need to be in that space, and that I have begun to realize that the onus lies with me. To sort of try to shift that conversation. So those of us who have the experience must share it so that those who knowingly and unknowingly, often it's an attempted connection. I've had people who've traveled to Africa or gone to different countries want to connect with me because they want to talk about that experience. The impact still matters. The intention is one thing, but the impact matters. Because most of the time I get stories of, oh, I've been to Africa, and I look back and say, okay, where? There's 54 countries. And then it's some, Southern African, East African, Central African country that I have no connection to. I may have visited, but then I'm left wondering, was that about connecting with me or about you sharing your story? And then you're walking into a context where I get asked this all the time. So I don't always want to talk about it or engage like that. So this is a work in progress. And then I just want to move towards closure by saying, this is about shifting dominant social discourse and narratives of diversity. It's an invitation to the meta shift for all of us. I think everybody who's gone before has talked about triple learning. It's an invitation to how can we as a society move beyond even the assumptions and into who we are as a society. It's about trust, it's about relationship, it's about those micro aggressions, shifting them to micro affirmations, and starting with, I'm from Italy, or my family came here from Ireland, how about you? There's a difference when those subtle things, those micro ways we engage and build relationship. And I want to say here, this is not about saying do not see color or difference. Please see me, acknowledge me, know me, but get to know me before you attempt to put me in a box. Because anyone who's experienced identity interrogation knows when the question is being asked from the intention and the space of, how do I place you? How do I box you? So what I want to end with, and I know we've gone over time and want to move to having some dialogue with you, I want to quickly read you two of the responses that came in from friends. So lots of comments, so much of what I've talked about all over these responses to the Facebook post. But here's a white South African friend of mine, a woman who does lots of work with women and in social space, and she says, I almost always take a deep breath when I'm asked this question. It is just not simple. It requires breath and time and heart. When I answer this question, I am bringing my heart, and how do we put that into a few sentences? I am from South Africa, but I am also from Taiwan. I live in Surrey, but more honestly, I am now from the world. I am from every person who has any piece of my heart. In Moldova, Burundi, and Beijing. I am from every place where I have felt a connection and walked the earth. In Prague and Paris and Pretoria. She's lived a lot of places, as you can begin to imagine. I am from steaming bowls of noodle soup, and I am from bobo tea and yellow rice. I am from chocolate croissants and the best beef stew ever around the table in Uganda. My favorite writing exercise is answering this question based on the poem by George Ella Leon. By the way, we did a synchro blog about this, and she says something about that. I have asked people this question when I first moved to Canada because I was so hungry for connection, but it is just not simple. And I want to leave you with this one. This is my friend. You'll get a sense of her background when I read this. Answer 1, Denmark. Or you want to go deeper? Answer 2, Danish/Ghanaian. Deeper still? Answer 3, Danish mom, Ghanaian dad, born in Botswana, live in Mozambique, with family in Barcelona. Still deeper? Not yet me? Answer 4, planetary citizen. I'm just here along for this ride. Through space. Is there more? Answer 5, brother or sister. I'm just your family. Where I'm from doesn't matter. Where are we going, family? That's the real question.